Welcome back, my friend. Before tonight's story begins, take a quiet moment for yourself. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let tonight's quiet journey begin. There were centuries when sailors crossed oceans so vast that loneliness itself began to take shape. Out beyond familiar coasts, where stars were maps and the sea could remain empty for weeks, men sometimes claimed they saw figures in moonlit water, not fish, not waves, not dream women, watching from the surface, following the ship, vanishing before dawn. Tonight, we follow what sailors thought they saw and why the ocean may have helped create mermaids. Before mermaids belonged to storybooks, they belonged to sailors. And long before people asked whether they were real, men alone at sea were asking a quieter question: what was moving beside the ship? When distance changes perception, months at sea altered more than routes. They altered perception. A sailor leaving Lisbon in the 16th century might spend weeks without seeing land. The same horizon, the same rigging, the same slow movement of water under moonlight. And when the world offers too little variation, the mind begins to notice things differently, not because it becomes irrational, but because it becomes attentive to suggestion. A change in light on a swell, a shape beside the hull, a movement that appears once, then disappears. At sea, especially at night, distance can distort proportion. A surfacing animal seen far off may seem larger, stranger, more human in form than it is. Moonlight can turn foam into texture. Phosphorescence can make water appear alive, and sometimes a moment of uncertainty is enough to begin a story. A sailor says he saw something beside the ship, not clearly, only briefly. Another sailor has heard a similar story before. He adds his own memory. A third repeats it on another voyage, and what began as a half-seen moment slowly becomes tradition. This may be where mermaids first lived, not as creatures fully believed in, but as possibilities carried by long voyages. Because the ocean creates unusual conditions: fatigue, loneliness, repetition, silence, and under those conditions, the mind does not invent from nothing. It works with fragments. It gives shape to what is uncertain. A seal lifting in dark water, a manatee surfacing at dusk, a reflection mistaken for a face. None of these need to become a legend, but repeated often enough, told often enough, remembered in the right tone, they can. And once they do, the sighting matters less than the story, because at sea, stories traveled almost as reliably as ships. And in that sense, mermaids may have begun not in fantasy, but in the quiet place where distance changes perception. The night watch and moving water. There was a particular hour sailors often feared, not midnight, but the hours after, when the body wanted sleep, but duty required attention. A man stood watch beside the rail, looking into black water for long stretches of time. At that hour, Small things could seem larger, ordinary sounds could feel unfamiliar, and moving water, seen under weak moonlight, could begin to suggest forms. A swell rising beside the hull might resemble a shoulder. Foam breaking in a certain pattern might suggest hair. A surfacing animal, seen once and then gone, could feel almost deliberate, not because sailors were eager to believe, but because night watch was a strange condition. Half duty, half exhaustion, a mind alert but also tired, and the ocean, at such hours, could appear unusually alive. Phosphorescence trailing in the wake, silver light on dark swells, shapes that seemed present, then vanished when looked at directly. Often, sailors did not say, "I saw a mermaid." They said, "There was something beside the ship." That uncertainty mattered, because legends often begin not in certainty, but in repeated ambiguity. Night watch culture preserved such things. Stories were told to stay awake, warnings mixed with superstition, practical caution mixed with folklore. Do not answer singing over water. Do not ignore something following the hull. Do not speak lightly of what appears after midnight. Some of this was tradition. Some may have been discipline disguised as myth, but together it kept certain ideas alive, and among them, mermaids remained. Not always as creatures, sometimes as possibilities, as presences half believed, half doubted, seen in the kind of light where the sea does not fully reveal what is moving in it. And perhaps that is where many mermaids lived, not in open sight, but in the long hours of night watch, where moving water, fatigue, and suggestion met each other in silence. When animals became legends. Some explanations may be simpler than the legends they inspired. The West Indian manatee, the dugong, slow-moving marine mammals, surfacing at dusk, often partly visible, often seen from a distance, in difficult light, with only a head, a back, or a lifting shape above water. Something familiar to nature could appear unfamiliar to the eye, and sometimes that was enough. Even Christopher Columbus recorded seeing what he called mermaids. He famously remarked they were not as beautiful as people claim. That small detail feels important because it sounds less like fantasy than observation passing through expectation. He may have seen manatees, but he described them through a vocabulary his culture already possessed. And that may be how many legends survive. Reality appears, tradition interprets, story preserves. A sailor sees a marine animal. Another sailor hears the account. Years later, it is repeated not as uncertainty, but as something almost witnessed, and with repetition, a misreading can become folklore. But what matters is not whether sailors were mistaken. They often were, as all observers can be. What matters is why certain mistakes endured, because not every error becomes a legend. Some disappear. Mermaids did not, perhaps because they existed at the edge between something real and something imagined. An animal seen imperfectly, a human mind interpreting through story, an ocean offering just enough ambiguity to let both survive. And once that happened, mermaids no longer depended on actual sightings. They belonged to maritime memory, a creature might be absent, the idea remained. And in that sense, what sailors called mermaids may not have begun with invention, but with ordinary creatures seen under extraordinary conditions, until nature itself slowly became legend. Why sailors needed mermaids. But explanation alone is incomplete, because even if some sightings were misread animals, that does not explain why mermaids endured. They endured because they meant something. Long voyages created absences, absence of home, absence of familiar voices, absence of beauty, at least in forms people had once known. And the mind, when living too long with absence, often gives symbolic form to what it misses. Perhaps that is one reason mermaids remained, not merely as creatures, but as presences. Half warning, half longing. To some sailors, a mermaid might suggest danger, a false promise, a distraction near reefs. To others, she may have meant something quieter, the idea that beauty could still appear in a place defined by hardship. That matters, because not every maritime belief survived. Many superstitions faded. Mermaids did not, perhaps because they lived at the meeting point between fear and comfort. They could warn, they could tempt, they could console. Few symbols at sea did all three, and symbols endure when they carry emotional weight. A sailor may not literally believe there was a woman beside the hull, but the idea that the sea held presence, that the ocean was not empty, may have answered something deeper than reason. The ocean can feel indifferent, too large to respond, too silent to interpret. Legends soften that silence. They place meaning where there may be none. And perhaps mermaids survived because they made the sea feel less empty, not safer, but inhabited. And for those crossing months of dark water, that may have mattered more than whether the creature was real, because sometimes a legend endures not because people mistake it for fact, but because it expresses something fact does not. And in that sense, mermaids may have survived not through sightings, but through need, a need shaped by loneliness, distance, and the old human instinct to place a face, a voice, a presence in the silence beside the ship. Before mermaids, there were sirens. Before sailors imagined mermaids beside a hull, there were older voices in the sea. The sirens in the Odyssey were not originally the sea women many later paintings imagined. They belonged to an older world where danger was often understood through story. To later readers, sirens became creatures of enchantment. But to ancient mariners, such stories may have preserved something practical. Rock, surf, hidden shoals, places where ships were lost before men could fully explain why. A dangerous coastline can sound alive. Wind passing through narrow rock formations, waves striking caverns in repeating patterns, bird calls carrying over broken water. In certain conditions, these may seem almost like voices, not because they are voices, but because the mind, hearing something unfamiliar at sea, often gives shape to sound. And when danger repeatedly appears in the same place, people often give that danger a form. Perhaps this is where sirens began, not as creatures waiting on rocks, but as warnings carried by memory. Do not sail too close. Do not trust calm water near jagged coast. Do not follow what seems inviting if it draws you off sound judgment. A warning is easier to remember when it has a face. Even easier when it has a song. And songs endure. They travel. They survive retelling. That may be why Sirens lasted. Because they did more than frighten. They preserved caution over centuries. The literal hazard may have become less clear. The symbol remained, and symbols once detached from their origin often begin to transform. A maritime warning becomes a myth becomes a figure, and a figure, slowly, may begin to resemble what later sailors would call mermaids. This does not mean sirens were simply misunderstood reefs, only that myth and practical knowledge often lived closer together than modern thinking assumes. Ancient sailors did not always separate symbol from survival. Sometimes they fused them, and in that fusion, a dangerous coastline could become a singing presence. A hidden shoal could become temptation given voice. And once that happened, sirens were no longer only about creatures. They were about the sea itself, understood as a place where beauty, warning, and loss could arrive together. Long before mermaids appeared beside moonlit hulls, those older voices may already have been moving through maritime memory. When warnings became beautiful, over time, warning often changes shape. What begins as danger can become story, and story, retold for centuries, can become beauty. This may be what happened with the sirens. If they began, in part, as a way of remembering hazards, then later generations inherited the warning without always inheriting the original fear. And when fear fades, imagination often fills the space. A dangerous coast becomes a legendary shore. A fatal song becomes an enchanting one. And a warning, once meant to keep sailors away, slowly becomes something that draws listeners closer. This is a strange transformation, but not an unusual one. Many old symbols change this way. They lose some practical function and gain poetic life. The sirens, over long centuries, seem to have drifted through such a change, not fixed, but evolving. In some later images, they become less bird-like, more associated with the sea, closer, in imagination, to what later ages would recognize as mermaid-like forms. That shift matters, because it suggests maritime legends did not stay still. They moved. They absorbed new meanings. And movement, after all, is the nature of things connected to oceans. A reef warning became a song became a figure became beauty. And once beauty entered the legend, it changed how sailors received it. A warning may be obeyed, but beauty is contemplated, remembered differently, repeated with different feeling. That may be why such legends endured, not because they remained useful in a practical sense, but because they became emotionally resonant. And emotion often preserves stories longer than caution does. By the time later sailors spoke of sea women, some old logic of the sirens may still have been moving beneath the tale, even if no one fully recognized it. Danger, recast as fascination. Loss, remembered through beauty. And perhaps this is where mermaids begin to emerge, not suddenly, but as one legend, slowly softening into another, not replacing the older warning, but carrying it forward in a gentler form. Because sometimes myths do not disappear, they transform, and in that transformation, what once sang sailors toward ruin may have become, centuries later, a quiet figure in moonlit water, watching ships pass. What sailors inherited from older seas. A sailor in the age of sail carried more than rope skills, charts, and knowledge of winds. He carried inherited ocean. Long before departure, a voyage had already begun in stories, port taverns, dockside warnings, old men repeating what they had heard from older men before them. A young mariner might learn navigation from officers, but he often learned the emotional map of the sea from rumor, folklore, and memory. There were waters said to sing, coasts said to lure ships inward, creatures marked on medieval charts, not always because cartographers believed in monsters, but because unknown spaces were often described through symbol, and symbols linger. A sailor carried these things aboard, not always consciously, but as atmosphere, as expectation, and expectation shapes perception. If a mariner had heard since youth that strange singing could drift over black water, then an unfamiliar sound at sea might arrive already interpreted, not invented in the moment, recognized through tradition. That may be how older sirens lingered inside later mermaids, not through direct belief, but through inherited mood. The ocean was not experienced as empty water alone. It came populated with memory, warnings, stories, presences, half symbolic, half imagined. And once such things live in tradition, they do not need proof to remain influential. They survive because they travel with those who believe only partly, doubt partly, but repeat fully. That is often how maritime folklore endured, not through conviction, but through circulation. A phrase repeated on one voyage becomes custom on another. A superstition in one port becomes atmosphere at sea, and slowly, a sailor does not merely cross an ocean. He enters an inherited one, an ocean already shaped by older fears, older warnings, older songs, and within that inheritance, mermaids may have gained depth, not as isolated creatures, but as figures carrying centuries of layered meaning. A little of the sirens, a little of medieval imagination, a little of sailors' loneliness, all moving together like currents beneath the visible sea. And perhaps that is what sailors truly inherited, not belief in mermaids alone, but a way of seeing the ocean as a place where reality and story never remained fully separate. Why sirens never fully vanished. Even when navigation improved and coastlines became better understood, sirens did not fully disappear, because by then they had ceased being creatures. They had become symbols, and symbols survive long after literal belief fades. A sailor in the 18th century might not expect to hear actual sirens, yet the old logic of the warning could remain. Do not trust what draws you away from judgment. Do not confuse what seems beautiful with what is safe. That is older than myth, and perhaps truer. This may be why sirens endured. Not because people kept believing in beings on rocks, but because the story continued to express something human: temptation, distraction, the quiet danger that does not arrive as threat, but as invitation. Such ideas do not become outdated. They simply change language, and as they changed, sirens may have softened, their severity eased, their older terror thinned, and what remained could pass more easily into the gentler figure of the mermaid. Not identical, but related. One legend carrying traces of another. This matters because myths often survive through transformation, not preservation. They do not remain fixed. They drift. They absorb new meanings. They move with the cultures carrying them. And maritime cultures, perhaps more than most, were always moving. Ports changed. Empires shifted. Routes widened. But old sea stories traveled with sailors, retold, reshaped, made softer or stranger with each generation. And in that long reshaping, sirens may never have vanished at all. They may have simply become less visible inside newer legends, a warning hidden inside beauty, a caution hidden inside wonder. And perhaps that is why, when later sailors spoke of sea women, something older still moved beneath the tale, not consciously, but atmospherically, like an old current moving under newer water. Because legends rarely disappear when their original form weakens. They tend to pass inward, becoming symbol, then mood, then inherited feeling. And inherited feeling can last a very long time. So before mermaids followed ships in moonlight, sirens may already have prepared a place for them, not by proving they existed, but by teaching sailors for centuries that the sea could hold presences not easily explained. And once that idea existed, mermaids no longer had to be invented from nothing. They only had to enter an ocean already prepared to receive them. Sailors who said they saw them. Section 3.1. Columbus and the sighting that endured. Among the most often repeated stories in mermaid history is a brief note from Christopher Columbus. In 1493, near the Caribbean, he recorded seeing 3 mermaids. He also remarked, with unusual plainness, that they were not as beautiful as people claim. That detail has lasted because it feels strangely unromantic. Not like invention, more like observation. And perhaps that is why this account endured. It sits in an uncertain place, part history, part misinterpretation, part legend. Most historians believe Columbus may have seen manatees, and this is plausible. Seen from distance, partly surfaced in imperfect light, such creatures could appear unfamiliar, especially to eyes already carrying older maritime imagery. But what matters is not simply what he saw, it is how he described it. He did not reject the word mermaid. He used it, even while qualifying it, and in doing so, he revealed something important. That observation at sea often passes through expectation. A thing appears. The mind reaches for a name, and the available names are shaped by culture. For Columbus, mermaids already existed as part of inherited imagination, So an unfamiliar marine sighting arrived already half interpreted. That does not make the account false. It makes it human, and perhaps that is why it feels so durable, because it shows, in a few plain lines, how legend and observation can meet. A real animal, a real witness, a legendary vocabulary, all present at once. And once recorded, the sighting took on a second life, no longer merely an entry in a journal, but evidence for some, curiosity for others, and through retelling, it became larger than the moment, not because 3 mermaids were proven beside the ship, but because the episode preserved something central to this whole tradition, that sailors did not always invent wonders from nothing. Sometimes they encountered something real and understood it through older stories. And perhaps that is where many mermaid tales lived, not in pure fantasy, not in pure fact, but in the narrow space where a living creature, a tired observer, and an inherited myth met each other on open water. And in that space, Columbus's brief sighting still drifts, half explanation, half legend, like something seen once, then carried much farther than the voyage itself. Section 3.2. Northern Seas and the Seal Women. Far north, where Atlantic water turned colder, another kind of sea woman appeared. Not mermaids exactly, but beings later called selkies. Stories spoke of seals that shed their skins and took human form ashore. These tales belonged largely to coastal folklore, but sailors heard them too, and once heard, they travel. What makes such stories interesting is not whether sailors believed them literally, it is how closely they grew from the environment itself. In northern seas, seals were constant presences, seen in fog, seen lifting their heads through grey water, seen vanishing with almost unnatural quiet. In poor light, at distance, a seal can appear strangely expressive, almost watchful, and where weather, isolation, and old oral traditions met, such animals could gather symbolic meaning. A creature becomes a presence becomes a story. That pattern feels familiar, like mermaids. Selkie legends may have lived in the narrow space between observation and longing, but northern versions carried something softer, less temptation, more melancholy. Not a figure luring sailors to ruin, but one connected to loss, separation, and returning to the sea. That emotional tone matters because it suggests sea legends were shaped by region. Warm waters imagined one kind of presence, cold waters imagined another, and sailors moving between regions carried these variations with them. Stories blended, boundaries softened. A mariner who had heard of mermaids in southern waters might hear of seal women in northern harbors and recognize not contradiction but kinship. Different names, different coasts, a similar idea that the sea held forms, part human, part other, never fully grasped. And perhaps that is why such stories endured, not because one creature was believed everywhere, but because many coastal worlds produced related presences, and sailors who moved between those worlds became carriers of them. So when we speak of mermaids, we may be speaking not of one legend, but of many sea-born figures slowly drifting together, and among them, in grey northern water, seal women watched from the cold, half animal, half inheritance. Like much else sailors thought they saw. Section 3.3. Songs heard over open water. Not all sea legends began with something seen. Some began with something heard. Among sailors, there were old accounts of sounds over water that seemed difficult to place, not always singing, as later imagination preferred. Sometimes tones, sometimes distant calls, sometimes something almost musical, then gone. This may sound mysterious, but open water carries sound strangely. Wind through rigging can produce tones. Whales can vocalize over long distances. Seabirds, heard but not seen in mist, can sound almost human, and waves striking rock, or even a ship's own structure, may create repeating patterns a tired mind begins to interpret. Perhaps this too helped sustain older ideas of sirens, not because sailors literally heard enchanted voices, but because the sea could generate sounds that felt unassigned, and what feels unassigned often invites story. A strange sound in daylight may be investigated. The same sound heard during a lonely night watch may be remembered differently, given meaning, retold, carried. Some whalers and long voyage sailors wrote less of mermaid scene and more of odd impressions, a sense of something accompanying the ship, a call mistaken for a moment for a human note. These are small things, but maritime legends often grow from small things. A sound not identified, a memory added, a warning attached, and slowly, what may have begun as acoustics enters folklore. This matters because it widens the question. Mermaid traditions may not belong only to visual misreadings. They may also belong to auditory ones. The sea not only produced shapes, it produced voices, or what seemed like voices. And once both shape and sound entered the old imagination, legends deepened. A figure beside the hull, a call over black water, together more powerful than either alone. Perhaps that is why stories of singing presences endured, because they drew from something real, not literal voices, but the strange acoustic life of oceans. And in that sense, what sailors thought they heard may have mattered as much as what they thought they saw, because on long voyages, in darkness, sound can feel like presence, and presence at sea has always been fertile ground for legend. Section 3.4. Why eyewitness stories persist. There is a reason old eyewitness stories endure, even when their details remain uncertain. It is not always because people believe them literally. Often, it is because they feel possible, and possibility has a long life. A sailor says he saw something beside the ship. Another reports hearing a strange sound. Neither account proves a creature, but neither feels impossible enough to vanish. That matters, because many stories disappear when they feel too detached from experience. Mermaid accounts often survived because they remained near experience. A marine animal might be real. A sound over water might be real. Fatigue, moonlight, isolation, all real. The legend grows not from fantasy alone, but from real conditions interpreted through story. That makes such accounts resilient, because even skeptical listeners can grant the conditions. They may doubt the conclusion, but not the circumstances. And where circumstances feel credible, stories often persist. There is another reason too. Eyewitness stories rarely survive because of evidence alone. They survive because they are repeated. Retelling gives durability, especially when a story carries wonder, uncertainty, and a detail hard to forget. Something beside the hull, a face in grey water, a voice over black sea. Such images remain, and once they remain, each retelling adds quiet reinforcement, not proof, but presence. The story stays in circulation, and what stays in circulation rarely dies easily. Perhaps that is why, centuries later, we still return to sailors' mermaid accounts, not because they settle a question, but because they keep one open. Did sailors see creatures, mistake animals, interpret loneliness? Perhaps at different times, all of these, and that openness itself helps the stories live. A fully solved story often rests, an unresolved one continues, and unresolved things travel far, especially at sea, where certainty has always been partial. So eyewitness stories endure, not because they prove mermaids, but because they preserve that narrow border where observation, error, and wonder briefly meet. And perhaps that border, more than any creature, is what sailors kept returning to. The place where something may have been seen, may have been heard, may have been mistaken, and still was worth telling again. When isolation changes the mind. Long voyages did not only test sails, provisions, or navigation. They tested perception. A sailor could spend months with little privacy, little novelty, and little separation from the same horizon. That kind of repetition has effects, not dramatic ones, at least not at first. Subtle ones. Attention changes. Time feels different. Ordinary thoughts can grow louder when there is too little else to interrupt them. And isolation at sea was often a particular kind. Not being alone, exactly, but being confined within a small human world, surrounded by a vast, non-human one. That contrast matters, because the mind does not experience endless space neutrally. It responds, sometimes through heightened alertness, sometimes through projection, sometimes through seeing significance in things half perceived. This does not mean sailors routinely hallucinated. That would be too simple. But long isolation can increase suggestibility, and suggestibility, combined with fatigue, can alter how uncertain things are interpreted. A sound may seem more intentional, a shape more animate, a coincidence more meaningful. And at sea, where uncertainty is common, these shifts may pass unnoticed because they do not feel extraordinary from within. They feel like perception. That matters, because many legends may have grown not from dramatic visions, but from ordinary perception slightly altered by conditions. A sailor alone on late watch sees movement beside the hull. He may not invent a mermaid, He may simply hold the impression longer than he otherwise would, and in holding it, he may begin to interpret. This is often how symbols enter experience, not imposed, but invited by ambiguity. The ocean offers much ambiguity: distance without landmarks, darkness without edges, sound without clear source, and isolation can make such ambiguity feel charged. Perhaps this is one reason stories of presences at sea endured. Not because loneliness created fantasies, but because it made uncertain impressions harder to dismiss. And once an impression is not dismissed, it can be remembered, repeated, shared, and in sharing, it may begin to resemble legend. So when sailors spoke of something watching from water or moving where no swimmer should be, part of that story may belong not to creatures at all, but to the subtle way isolation changes the mind. Sleep deprivation and the edges of perception. There is a difference between isolation and exhaustion. A sailor might endure both, and when they combine, perception can change in quieter ways. Sleep deprivation does not always produce visions. Often, it alters attention first. Response slows. Focus narrows. Small ambiguities linger longer before being resolved. At sea, where many things are already uncertain, this matters. A moving shadow seen by a rested mind may be dismissed at once. The same shadow seen after broken sleep may hold shape for a moment longer, and sometimes a moment longer is enough. Long voyages, often fractured sleep, night watches, weather interruptions, noise from rigging, sudden duties. Rest was not always deep or regular, and irregular sleep can soften the boundary between impression and interpretation, not erase it. Soften it. A sound may seem directed. A distant movement may feel deliberate. An ordinary marine animal may seem stranger before the mind fully corrects. Again, this is not fantasy arriving whole. It is perception holding uncertainty slightly longer than usual. That may matter more than dramatic hallucination, because legends often grow from slight distortions, not impossible visions. A sailor says, for a moment, he thought he saw a face or heard a call. He later doubts it, but tells the story anyway. And once told, that fleeting uncertainty enters memory. Sleep deprivation may have helped create such moments, not by inventing mermaids, but by widening, briefly, the edges of perception. And the edges of perception are often where symbols enter, because what is seen unclearly is often interpreted culturally through old stories, old warnings, old expectations. In that sense, a tired sailor did not merely misperceive. He may have perceived first and interpreted second through inherited myth. That distinction matters, because it keeps the story human, not irrational, but conditioned. And perhaps on some long voyages, under broken sleep and moonlit watch, what sailors thought were mermaids appeared not because reality disappeared, but because certainty loosened, just enough for older stories to move through what was seen. Sound, singing, and auditory misreading. Not all uncertainty at sea belongs to what is seen. Some belongs to what is heard, and sound, perhaps even more than sight, can be difficult to place, especially over water. Open water carries sound strangely. It can extend distance, blur direction, make something far away seem close, or something near feel unlocated. To sailors, this was not theory, it was experience. Rigging in wind could produce tones. Hull timbers, under strain, could groan rhythmically. Seabirds in mist could sound almost human, and whales, heard but not seen, could produce calls few early sailors had language to describe. None of this creates sirens, but it creates ambiguity, and ambiguity, heard repeatedly, can become meaningful. A sound returns night after night. A sailor begins to expect it. Another hears it once and remembers the story attached. Soon, acoustics and folklore are no longer separate, they overlap. This may help explain why singing presences endured in maritime imagination. Not because sailors literally heard voices calling them, but because the sea could produce sounds that invited human interpretation. And interpretation at night often leans toward what is already known. Old warnings, old legends, old names. A strange sound may become a call, a presence, and once presence is felt, legend has entered. There is something else. Sound can feel intimate in ways distant shapes do not. A shape may be observed. A sound can seem addressed. That may be why stories of voices over water carried such force. They did not merely suggest something existed. They suggested it was aware, and awareness, real or imagined, changes how an event is remembered. Perhaps this is why sirens were so enduring, because they gathered into one symbol many ordinary sea experiences: wind, whales, bird cries, rigging tones, all passing under certain conditions through human imagination. And in that sense, what sailors thought they heard may have shaped mermaid legends almost as much as what they thought they saw. Because sometimes, at sea, a sound in darkness can feel more alive than any form in moonlight. When the mind prefers a presence. By this point, three conditions have quietly gathered: isolation, exhaustion, ambiguity. Each alone may change little. Together, they can alter how uncertainty feels, not by creating fantasies whole, but by making presence feel easier to infer. That may be important, because the mind, when given incomplete information, often prefers pattern to emptiness. A shape may become intention. A sound may become address. A repeated impression may begin to feel accompanied. This is not deception in the ordinary sense. It may be a feature of how perception seeks coherence, and coherence at sea can be comforting. An indifferent ocean is difficult to interpret. A presence, even imagined, feels more graspable. Perhaps this is one reason sea legends took human form. Not only because humans tell stories through faces, but because faces organize uncertainty. A mermaid, a sea woman, a singing presence. These may be less about creatures than about the mind giving shape to what otherwise remains diffuse. And once shaped, it can be remembered. shared, inherited. That may be where perception quietly becomes folklore, not in a dramatic vision, but in the moment an uncertain impression feels just coherent enough to keep. And once kept, it may be told. A sailor does not say, "I experienced altered perception." He says, "I thought something moved beside us," or "I heard something over the water." Story begins there, in ordinary language, not theory. And because it begins simply, it travels. Perhaps this is why mermaid traditions endured so widely. They gathered animal sightings, strange acoustics, fatigue, loneliness, and old inherited myths into forms people could carry. Not scientific explanations, human ones. And human explanations, even when imperfect, often survive. So by the time sailors spoke of what they thought they saw, those stories may already have been shaped not only by oceans, but by the mind's quiet preference for presence over emptiness. And perhaps that, more than any creature, is what moved beside so many ships. Why the ocean needed a face. If mermaids endured, perhaps it was not because sailors proved creatures existed, but because the ocean in human imagination needed a face. The sea can feel vast in ways difficult to personalize, too large to answer, too indifferent to interpret. And human beings often respond to such scale by giving it form. Mountains gained spirits, forests gained presences, and oceans, perhaps, gained mermaids, not as biology, as symbol. A face placed where emptiness felt too absolute. That may matter, because an unresponsive world can feel harder to endure than a mysterious one. Mystery can be lived with. Total indifference is more difficult. Perhaps mermaids soften that indifference, not by making oceans safe, but by making them inhabited. A presence in the water, a watcher beside the hull, a figure half imagined through whom the sea seemed less silent. This does not make the symbol trivial. It may help explain its power, because symbols survive when they answer something practical or emotional, or both. Mermaids may have answered loneliness. They may have answered fear. They may have answered a deeper human impulse to find relation where none is obvious. And relation matters. A world that contains presences feels different from one that contains only emptiness. Perhaps sailors knew this intuitively, even when skeptical, even when joking, even when only half believing, because symbols do not require full belief to shape imagination. They require resonance, and mermaids resonated across centuries, across coasts, across cultures. That suggests something larger than a simple maritime error. It suggests the legend answered something recurrent, a need perhaps to humanize the inhuman scale of oceans. And in that sense, the phrase "the ocean invented mermaids" may be understood another way. Not that water created creatures, but that life at sea created conditions where such symbols became almost inevitable. Loneliness, distance, animal encounters, strange acoustics, inherited myths, all gathering until a face appeared in imagination. And once it appeared, it stayed. Perhaps not because it was true in the literal sense, but because it was true in another one, true to how humans meet vastness by giving it a presence. And perhaps in moonlit water, that presence became what sailors called a mermaid. The last age sailors still believe. There may have been a final age when sailors did not fully separate legend from possibility, not because they were less rational, but because the world at sea still contained larger regions of uncertainty. In the 18th and even 19th centuries, oceans were better charted than before, yet vast areas remained poorly understood. Deep waters, remote coasts, strange species rarely observed closely. In such a world, mermaids did not need to be treated as proven creatures to remain imaginable. That may be enough, because possibility, more than belief, often sustains legends. A sailor might laugh at a mermaid tale in daylight, then repeat it seriously on a midnight watch. That ambiguity mattered. It kept the legend alive, and perhaps this was the last age when such ambiguity felt natural. Before industrial oceans, before electric light at sea, before so much of mystery began to feel mapped, something changed after that. Not because wonder disappeared, but because the conditions that fed older maritime imagination began to thin. Long, silent crossings shortened. Unknown creatures became classified. Old oral traditions weakened, and yet mermaids did not vanish. They changed register from possible presences into remembered symbols. That transition is important because it suggests legends do not die when belief recedes. They migrate from expectation into culture, and perhaps the last sailors who half believed stood exactly in that threshold. 1 foot in older oceans, one in a more measured world, still willing now and then to leave a little room for what could not be confirmed. There is something moving in that, because skepticism and wonder are not always opposites. Sometimes they coexist, and perhaps they did for many sailors. Enough to keep old stories circulating, enough to let moonlit water still hold, for a moment, more than reflected light. And if there was a last age when sailors still believed, perhaps belief itself was never the essential thing. Perhaps what mattered was that the ocean still felt capable of holding presences not fully explained, and where that feeling survives, legends rarely end. They only grow quieter. Why modern oceans feel less haunted. It may seem that modern oceans feel less haunted than older ones, less inhabited by presences, less fertile for legends. Perhaps that is partly true, but the reason may not be that mystery disappeared, only that our relationship to mystery changed. Older sailors entered darkness with less information, less light, less instrumentation, less certainty. Much that appeared arrived without immediate explanation. Today, radar answers some questions, navigation reduces others, electric light alters night itself, and technologies, by naming more of what we encounter, can reduce the space where symbolic presences form. That changes atmosphere. A strange sound may now be recognized as machinery, or whale song, or structural vibration. A distant form may be identified faster, and what is identified quickly often does not become legend. But perhaps modern oceans are not less mysterious, only differently interpreted, because the sea remains vast, still deeper than much we know, still carrying life rarely seen, still capable of producing uncertainty. What may have changed is not the ocean, but the imaginative habits brought to it. We are slower, perhaps, to personify, quicker to classify, and classification, while powerful, can quiet certain kinds of wonder, yet not erase them. Because even now, people still speak of strange lights at sea, odd sounds, unexpected encounters. The language changes. The impulse may not. Perhaps mermaids receded, not because the ocean expelled them, but because modern minds gave the old uncertainties new names, and names matter. They can close one story while opening another. A sea monster becomes a species. A siren becomes acoustics. A mermaid becomes folklore. But something persists beneath that. The same old recognition that the ocean exceeds what we comfortably hold, and where excess remains, mystery remains. Perhaps modern oceans feel less haunted, only because haunting now speaks in quieter forms, not as sea women beside hulls, but as a lingering sense that even mapped water contains more than maps contain. And if that is true, then perhaps old legends have not vanished at all. They have simply withdrawn like distant lights from the center of belief into the edges of imagination. What may still move beside a ship in moonlight? At the end, perhaps the question is not whether mermaids existed, but why, for so long, so many sailors felt the sea could hold presences. That question may matter more, because it reaches beyond creatures into something quieter. How humans meet vastness, how uncertainty gathers form, how loneliness, beauty, and danger sometimes borrow the same symbol. Perhaps that symbol was the mermaid, not a body in water, but a way of speaking about what the ocean did to those who crossed it. The sea enlarged perception, softened certainty, offered shapes, sounds, and distances not easily fixed, and in such conditions, presence may have felt possible. Perhaps that is enough, because legends do not always survive by proving literal things. Sometimes they survive by preserving emotional truths, that the ocean can feel inhabited, that silence can feel watchful, that moonlit water under certain conditions can seem to hold more than reflected light. And even now, one can imagine a ship crossing dark water, late when the horizon disappears and wake glows faintly behind. Something moves in the imagination there, even for those who do not believe. Not necessarily a creature, perhaps only an old pattern stirring, an inherited feeling returning. And maybe that is what still moves beside a ship in moonlight. Not mermaids in the literal sense, but the old human tendency to feel presence where vastness resists explanation. That tendency is ancient and perhaps inseparable from wonder itself, so the story may end where it began, not with proof, but with a sailor looking over black water, seeing something uncertain and not dismissing it too quickly, because in that hesitation, legend begins, and perhaps in some quiet way, it begins there still, not as belief, as possibility. And possibility, like the sea, does not end easily. It recedes, returns, moves under thought, like a current unseen. And so, if something still moves beside a ship in moonlight, perhaps it is not a mermaid. Perhaps it is the old meeting point between ocean, mind, and story, and that, for centuries, may have been enough to keep the sea beautiful, strange, and gently haunted